often it is about the language. It's understanding what's the frame of reference. Get that language right, and that's absolutely crucial. I'll have some conversations with leaders and you bring in the word well-being and you're completely on deaf ears. Have other same conversations with the same leader and start talking about key people risks,
Yep.
and then you've got them. We talk a lot about, we don't do well-being to people. And I use the word well-being in that sort of broader sense, encompassing psychosocial risk. Whereas a lot of approaches to well-being, hence the reason it kind of falls into, in fact, it came out of a conversation today with a senior leader. Yeah, it's a bit of a tick box though, isn't it? And yes, it is still very commonly seen as tick box. It's seen as we're doing this because we feel, other people do it, and then therefore we haven't really got a robust approach around it. The interesting thing with stress management, I find, is we still tend to look at stress through this lens of a silo. Stressors are bad things. Yes, absolutely. Workplace stress, there's no such thing as a little bit of stress is good for it's nonsensical. No such thing. But understanding that the fact that our stressors can also be our enablers. All the things which create stress, whether it's work design, work demands, job control, autonomy, communication styles, support, relationships, all of those things can be stressors if they're not working. If they are working, that will be the reasons why people are thriving.
All right, welcome to another episode of the Art of Safety Leadership podcast. Today we've got an awesome guest with us, over 30 years experience in workplace wellbeing. I'd like to welcome Stephen Haynes to the podcast.
Thank you, pleasure to be here.
Now Stephen, do you want to give us a bit of an overview, just a scene set about, before we get into the pod itself, a bit about you, where you've been working, your work thus far. Tell the listeners out there a little bit about yourself.
Sure, so my background has been in workplace wellbeing in some shape or form since the mid-90s. I started in health insurance, group health insurance, and then I moved into benefit consultancy and sales and marketing within the health insurance sector, and then gradually moved into consultancy work. And then from there, I really got the bug for wanting to work with organizations to really unlock and optimize people experience. And in about 2010, I set up my own consultancy firm doing that with organizations, which was amazing, challenging, hard work running your own small business, but great fun. I did a lot of in-house roles with organizations, which was wonderful. And then in the last 10 years, moved back into full-time employment and went to work for the charity Mates in Mind, which then led on to working within British Safety Council as Director of Wellbeing.
So you're the Director of Wellbeing Consultancy within the British Safety Council.
Yep.
Tell us more about that work and how's that particularly started to evolve over the last few years as this whole kind of wellbeing at work kind of issues really started to open up and be kind of talked about a lot more openly than it perhaps was earlier on in your career?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I really got into wellbeing consultancy, I would say, in the early noughties. And at that point, a lot of wellbeing was very much tertiary end. We were still talking about benefits. In fact, strategic wellbeing at that point was very much around integration of health-related benefits, optimizing treatment pathways, getting the most out of things such as group income protection or disability insurance and medical insurance and occupational health. And then gradually it's evolved very much into a broader people experience piece. In fact, today, interestingly enough, we don't really use the word well-being, although it's in my title. Really, it's about understanding the language that we come from to explore what we're trying to address. I mean, if I talk a lot about fundamentally well-being at work is about identify the key people risks and then put in place the relevant solutions to address those. And often those solutions can be anything from education-based through to communication strategy, through to optimizing treatment pathways. But fundamentally, it's about find the pain to fix the pain.
Yep. And is that, so you use the word tertiary in terms of where perhaps the industry was earlier on in the early noughties. And presumably we've seen a direction of that kind of come into sort of secondary and sort of more primary level kind of control. Do you want to just explain what that means for people out there?
Yeah, so if we think about tertiary level control, this is very much that point of need. When things go wrong, we've got the support infrastructure in place, whether that's occupational health, health-related benefits, employee assistance program probably being one of the most prevalent that would come to mind. Secondary is all about upskilling, about empowering the right people with the right skills, behaviours, competencies, and so forth. Primary is all very much about actually the culture. It's understand what are the factors which are driving things such as psychosocial risk or stress risks with organisations, design them out from the outset. And primary, I would say, is 80 to 90% of the game. And a lot of organisations still tend to focus at the tertiary end because it's easy. And I don't mean tangible. That critically. It's a lot easier. It's a lot safer, isn't it, to be able to say, okay, we've got some great benefits, we're going to put them in place because I kind of know what I'm doing. The primary stuff is kind of outside almost the purview of our typical owner of well-being within the organisation, which tends to be health and safety and or HR, whereas actually it's looking at it at the broader lens and looking at it through that lens of actually who's responsible and who owns well-being in the business actually is everybody. But it's about determining and understanding what the roles and responsibilities are for our leaders, for our people managers, for our employees, and for our people management functions in HR and health and safety.
I think, thanks for explaining that. I think doing some of the background for today's episode, I noticed some of your commentary was very focused around, particularly for leaders, to really recognise the criticality of understanding this issue better and structure, I suppose, solving for it in a more structured way because of perhaps not so much the social impact, obviously that's important and relevant, but actually if you're the CEO of a business and you're trying to deliver business performance outcomes, this should be something you're taking notice of. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Every business leader knows, what are the things that we go home at the end of every day and talk to our friends and our family about. When we're talking about our work, we're not going home and saying, I love working for my company because we've got such amazing helplines and health-related benefits. It might be part of what we're saying, but fundamentally we're going home and we're saying, I love working for British Safety Council, say 365, because my manager empowers me. I've got autonomy, I've got a voice, I'm making a real difference, whatever that might be. And it's those fundamental elements which are critical. We tend to look at this through the lens of inhibitors and enablers. What are the things at work which are inhibiting our people from performing optimally? How well do we understand those in order for us to turn those inhibitors into enablers? And from a leadership perspective, understanding what's driving my people. Why do we have high turnover? What are the key underlying factors? We tend to look at it a bit like, it's a bit like think of the iceberg analogy. We've got... You ask any organisation, we'll have a good sense on the surface. What are our key people risks? We'll have a good sense on the surface. It's X, Y, and Z. Succession planning, leadership styles, or communication styles, for example. We'll have a reasonably good sense. What we don't necessarily know is the stuff underneath. What's the impact of that on the business? What are the behaviour styles? What are creating those inhibitors in our business, and to what extent? That's not to say every single organisation has got, we're either all at the inhibitor stage or all at the enabler stage. Everyone's at a different stage. But fundamentally, understanding that is crucial to helping us optimise bottom line business performance. What the interesting thing with stress management, I find, is we still tend to look at stress through this lens of a silo. Stressors are bad things. Yes, absolutely. Workplace stress, there's no such thing as a little bit of stress is good for it's nonsensical. No such thing. But understanding that the fact that our stressors can also be our enablers. All the things which create stress, whether it's work design, work demands, job control, autonomy, communication styles, support, relationships, all of those things can be stressors if they're not working. If they are working, that'll be the reasons why people are thriving. That'll be the reasons why we've got great creativity in our organizations. We've got great team relationships. So it's rather than looking at stress through the lens of one silo, try to think of the stressors as the inhibitors. Get us thinking about What does a great day at work look like for us? How do we optimize that? How do we maximize it? And I'll caveat that with, you're never going to have everybody in an organization always at 100% optimal all the time. That's when we've got to be realistic.
Yeah.
But the more we understand, the more informed an approach we can take.
It's really fascinating stuff. And do you see, because we hear about terms like workplace well-being and psychosocial risk management and these sort of different terms thrown around, and there's sort of that common definition of the space seems to be something that's still kind of really kind of landing, I suppose, out there. Do you want to sort of give us your sort of perspective on that? Are they all the same thing, but just with different terms, or are there slightly different kind of segments of the problem that some of those terms refer to?
I think probably for me the simplest way I look at it is if we look at psychosocial risk management. If you look at something like the 45,003 framework, for example, if you optimally embed the guidance from 45,003 into a workplace, you have pretty much got 99% of the optimal well-being framework in an organization.
Yep.
The key, of course, with embedding the guidance, because it's brilliant guidance, the key is, of course, how do you make it land within your organization?
Yep.
And that's the nuance.
Yes. Yep. And that's quite consistent with most management system frameworks, right? It's not that different to 45,001 or quality management 9001, where the guidance is very good, the framework's very good, the proof in the pudding is in the implementation, right? And in terms of how it actually lands, penetration into the organisation, so people kind of actually really understand it, understand the value proposition, can buy into it. With the 45,000, because it's still pretty early days, right, in terms of the 45,003 framework coming through. What's been your sort of observations on that? Is that a framework that you're seeing kind of generating a bit of a head of steam up out there, or is it still kind of still being sort of cherry picked by sort of certain sort of organisations out there, or is it starting to get a bit more adoption?
Definitely getting more traction. We find that, from my experience, I find that organisations that have got 45,001, it's a lot easier to have that conversation because they've got a robust management system in place already, and it's then adopting and embedding the psychosocial risk management elements of that. So it's a lot easier. Again, the organisation that hasn't got 45,001, or even some organisations with 45,001, it's not always the go-to solution. It's often depending on where the organisation is in terms of their maturity. With psychosocial risk management, stress management, well-being, organisations are 101,000 different variants.
Yes.
Everything from we're still at tertiary end to organisations which have fully embedded it effectively.
Yep. And I'd probably even say there's like even another layer to that out there, like all of our sort of small, mid-sized businesses out there. They're in the kind of building the plane as they're flying it mode as well. So they're probably purely looking at more at a acute stress level in their business, based on if they've got 10, 15 people in their business. They're probably not thinking of the systemic factors so much. They're probably more just observing people doing work and responding to situations where it's, they're seeing that stress, as compared to probably, the much larger organisations in public sector and multinational type organisations who are obviously trying to take much more of a systemic, approach, where the framework, for example, kind of really starts to play a bit of a role in terms of defining what that looks like for their organisation. So it is a vast playing field, right? And so the range of solutions out there to try and respond to that is going to need to be vast.
Absolutely, and it's fascinating. In fact, today we were working with a small startup financial services organisation, and that's fascinating because all the same challenges that we see there, and this company has less than 50 employees. This is an organisation that wants to embed a strategic approach to well-being from the outset, so they don't want to do it retrospectively 2 or 3 years down the line when they become 500-600 employees. Logical approach. And then you look at the other organisations we might work with, say 4,000 or 5,000 employees, and all the same factors are still there. We're all human beings. The baggage we bring from one company into another create our little clusters of cultures, which all have differing effects within the workplace. One of the most interesting things, I hear it less today than I did before, was this observation of, we need to cut back on things. So we need to cut back on, we can cut back on the well-being nonsense or the well-being stuff, and which is an interesting one because, of course, it's understanding what we actually mean by well-being.
Yep.
I was with a global organisation about a year ago, and we just started this project with them. And on the first day, the head of people had said to me, we're going to get to well-being once we've got our other key people priorities sorted, which to them were safe working environment, secondly was around optimized leadership, and the third was around employee engagement. And it was quite sad to hear this because obviously fundamentally all of those things you can't have if you haven't got organizational or employee well-being. But then of course it comes back down to what's our frame of reference? What is well-being to us? Now this was a US-centered organization, so the focus was very much on tertiary-based benefits. Obviously within North America you get the huge stipends for having the well-being related or wellness-related initiatives as part of the healthcare insurance, so it kind of made sense where the frame of reference was coming from. But often it is about the language. It's understanding what's the frame of reference. Get that language right, and that's absolutely crucial. I'll have some conversations with leaders, and you bring in the word well-being, and you're completely on deaf ears. Have same conversations with the same leader and start talking about key people risks,
Yep.
and then you've got them.
Business continuity, resilience is a big one at the moment.
Yep.
As a frame of reference. That's really interesting. What about one of the other kind of terms you used in there, which I think is worth digging into a little bit more, is you talked about even that small mid-sized business, the financial services, wanting to take a strategic approach to well-being. Do you want to just, and I think we've touched on bits of this already, but just really keen to get you to sort of package that up for us a little bit around what do you mean when you say a strategic approach to well-being? So if I'm a CEO or a CFO out there or a head of safety and someone tells me that, like what's the message there for them?
So fundamentally it's about understanding the context of the organisation.
Yep.
Obviously the people, the dynamics, what are our strengths, what are our weaknesses, what do we ultimately want to achieve. This is a startup financial services organisation, which is fascinating because, of course, from their perspective, one of the key risks is actually just the mental health risks on people that are continuously in startup mode. Because, of course, you're taking on multiple roles, you're taking on multiple factors within your workplace, you're continuously pushing your mind, and, of course, that can create tremendous stresses. So part of their framework should also be about, okay, how do we equip our leaders and our managers and our employees to become more resilient and understand the impact of those factors so they can better identify and mitigate, I should say, those factors out. So that will be a key part to them. To a larger organization, it look very, very different. But fundamentally, it is about understanding what are the key internal and the key external factors which can influence our people. Because, of course, how people think, feel, and act is all driven by our well-being. And of course, how people think, feel, and act will influence
work.
Absolutely, yes.
Absolutely.
I have this. We talk a lot about human beings as being infectious sponges. Although someone did correct me recently and say, try just calling it we're contagious. But maybe. But I quite like the sponge piece because we soak up things. Already in the first 10 minutes of meeting you, I'm picking up on your behaviours, I'm observing you, and that's helping inform how I interact or how we interact as well, which is wonderful. Same within the workplace context. We will aspire to lead and drive and be influenced by people around us. If people are coming to work with, oh God, I really don't like working here, or I've got these issues, or those challenges, or I've got challenges at home. We're all one human individual, aren't we? This concept of do we bring our whole selves to work, I think maybe a bit of a misnomer, but yes, we do bring our whole selves to work quite physically. But of course, it's how authentic can we then be in the workplace as well. What do our behaviours do around others? And fundamentally, if we haven't got leadership, understanding, and buying in and driving and setting the tone, it will never work effectively from a wellbeing perspective in a workplace. And I know it sounds such a cliche, doesn't it, to say, we've got to get leadership on board. Such a cliche. But of course, if we don't, it's never going to work. But I've never come across a leader that genuinely wants to do wrong by their people.
No,
it's just complete nonsense.
Correct, yeah.
But you do come across leaders that will say, I don't fully understand it.
Awareness.
Empower me so I can make the right call.
Yeah, and I think part of that awareness, I mean, I was looking at some of the British data, the UK data just recently, and it's something like, I think 1 in 2 work-related health events, in effect, or claims is well-being related. So the throughput of that into productivity, there's been reports done over the last few years. McKinsey Health did one a couple of years ago, started to put some economic modelling around that. It's staggering. I think it was 60 billion pounds of economic leakage, so money that's already been transacted that's not creating any productivity whatsoever, and then about another 60 billion on the table of opportunity costs and other issues in terms of lost productivity. So if you're a CEO thinking about, should I be taking this well-being thing seriously or not? It's high time to really sit up and take notice of it. It doesn't, to your point, it doesn't really matter whether you're a 10 or 15 person business or a 4, 5, 10, 100,000 person enterprise out there. If you multiply out the same ratios, then the value, opportunity, cost is so significant at a strategic level that absolutely should be front and center, right?
Absolutely. And the financial piece is a fascinating one, isn't it? Because there's a lot of great data out there which talks about the financial broader costs of, let's just use the term well-being in its generic in its widest form. But of course, how relatable is that actually to a CEO of a 50-man company?
Yep.
Or what does that mean to me? It's, I kind of get it. Yeah, I'm hearing this day in, day out, invest X in Y and you get Z back.
Yep.
But how does that translate for me as a business owner?
Yeah.
I don't know. We did a piece of work recently, actually, with a small firm of scaffolders. And that was fascinating in that what we discovered when we started exploring, what do you like, what do you dislike about your work?
Yep.
And it was fascinating because, the things which were, obviously apparent at the teams on the ground was very unapparent to the business owners.
Yep.
And by unlocking that, essentially taking that iceberg, pulling the iceberg out of the water and spinning it around and giving a much broader, completed picture, enabled us and enabled the leadership to know, okay, these are the things we've got to shift, these are the dials we've got to change, because actually that's having a really significant detrimental impact on our people. That's why we find a lot of our people are moving over to other companies. I thought it was just because they paid more over there.
Yep.
Actually, no, it's because of these factors.
Yep. And sometimes it's a harsh truth as well to really dig into that. Sometimes it's nicer to believe that they're leaving because someone pays them more. It's a lot, but that's the reality for a lot of leaders. And so if we accepted, and I think we absolutely do accept that, we need to reveal the iceberg effect. We actually need to see it to be able to understand, the size of the prize and the opportunity that goes with that. So what are the kind of key strategies or the things that you can look at into a business to help start to perhaps reveal a bit more of what that iceberg kind of looks like, do you think?
So for me, it's about building pictures.
Yep.
And telling stories. I love spending days on site with clients at those initial stages. What I tend to do in my initial work is picture building.
Yep.
And that's a combination of things. It can be focus groups or workshops.
Yep.
It can be data reviews.
Yep.
We spend a lot of time analysing data, but analysing data and triangulating it from multiple points.
Yep.
So, our employee assistance program data is going to give us a small part, a very small part of the picture. Our absence data, depending on how robust our management system is around absence, will give us another part of the picture. Yep. Our employee survey data will give us another part, depending on which survey measures were used, what parts we used and so forth, and what was the outputs of that. What did we do with the follow-up to that? Were focus groups done, for example? We tend to look at a lot of raw data, triangulating all these pieces of the puzzle, and that could also include things like turnover data.
Yep.
It could look at exit interview data. Essentially, it's what is available within an organisation. The first piece of advice I would always give to any organisation is look at your data. How much do you already know? How robust is what you know? What's missing?
Yep.
What's relevant to fill the gaps on what's missing? Go ahead, do it. That gives you a much more informed picture of your key people risks. That enables you then to know, how do we then address that? What are the solutions we now need to put in place which are going to help us mitigate that?
Right, I'm keen to dig in a little bit more to ISO 45003 and kind of just get your perspective on what you're seeing out there and how that's been utilised in market and how that's been integrated into, I suppose, organisations out there that have an existing 45001 accreditation or certification. And I suppose, with that context, I think some of the challenges for the marketplace out there for a lot of our health and safety professionals and our business leaders is that with things like, I suppose, the more traditional components of health and safety, there's quite a lot of frames of reference of what good looks like. There's some really good sort of case studies and case law and, so many great things to absorb and sort of and tangibly bring in those ingredients to your own operating context and get a result. Whereas I suppose the observation with such what is still a new framework in 45003 with the rapidly increasing awareness of the real value proposition of doing this well from a wellbeing perspective in an organisation. So there's a lot of work going in to try and implement these around businesses around the world. Can you give us a bit of start us off with the 45003, what your observations are so far out there and perhaps some of the great work you're seeing and maybe some of the challenges you're seeing as well?
Yeah. The framework itself is fantastic. As I mentioned earlier, one of the big challenges with it is how do you make it land in your business, which is really key. And a starting point often is understanding the roles and responsibilities of the key stakeholders. Because unfortunately, 45003, to fully embed it effectively, it doesn't just involve HR or health and safety.
Yes. Yep.
It would involve multiple stakeholders within the business. One of the most important factors within 45003, absolutely spot on, is consultation. Is actually getting people involved in the mix and being able to demonstrate that you've done what you've done in consultation, collaboration with employees. Yep. We talk a lot about, we don't do well-being to people. And I use the word well-being in that sort of broader sense, encompassing psychosocial risk. Whereas a lot of approaches to well-being, hence the reason it kind of falls into, in fact, it came out of a conversation today with a senior leader. Yeah, it's a bit of a tick box though, isn't it? And yes, it is still very commonly seen as tick box. It's seen as we're doing this because we feel, other people do it, and then therefore we haven't really got a robust approach around it. Fundamentally, to embed a management system or a framework into an organisation needs consultation with the right stakeholders. It needs an informed approach before you get to it. You need to really understand what you're dealing with before you start going down that road. And 45003, it's guidance at the moment. It might become more embedded within 45001, which is fantastic if it does. Fundamentally, though, it's about how do we make it land for our organisation? What are the buttons we're going to press? What's going to look different? How do we effectively embed it?
What are the biggest mistakes or challenges you've seen with practitioners out there trying to embed 45003 into the organisation thus far?
Probably the most obvious one is where it's being owned and solely led by either one or a small team within the business. It's not something that can be done in the silo.
So that's around that. So that goes back to your opening comments there around, consultation, engagement, really getting broad awareness and understanding of, their context around, what you're trying to achieve and why.
Yeah.
So what any other ones you've seen out there in terms of kind of challenges with implementing the framework?
I think, the other challenge we see is alignment within the internal functions as well. It's still very common to still see a misalignment between HR and health and safety within workplaces. And particularly when we talk about 45003 or wellbeing or just stress management in general, it's vital to get the HR and health and safety aligned. Yep. And often they still tend to work in silos. I would say from my experience, about 70-80% of the organizations I work with when we start with, we're still seeing not deliberately because we want to do the wrong thing. We still don't see them joined up. Yep. And then therefore, actually, what we tend to see then is actually your biggest stumbling block is, well, who's going to be responsible for this?
Yep. Or even who's going to be accountable for this, to sort of check it out there. my observations, seeing thousands of organisations that we work with around the world, is that often you'll have people in culture who sort of look to the health and safety sort of side of things because of the risk discipline around it. That's typically where you would go to traditionally to get sort of risk assessments of health and safety related risks for the business. But then on the flip side of that, talking to a lot of the health and safety professionals out there, they feel many of them feel like they don't have enough depth of understanding of this particular topic around wellbeing, psychosocial risk, to apply the same level of their technical expertise over that subject matter. And so there's sort of there's in some ways that there's a desire to want to take it on, but probably lack of almost clarity and understanding of what that actually means. So you sort of get sometimes a sort of juxtaposition between the two personas and sometimes very large entities. I've seen some great examples of that being addressed through actually it being jointly held and owned, that particular function, and had people in culture and health and safety both co-reporting into executive, that kind of thing. Are you seeing that sort of stuff popping up more and more?
Yeah, in fact, we're just doing a piece of work at the moment with a global imaging company, and one of the reasons why it was easy for them, or easier, not that this is difficult, it's fun what we do, but what was great there was they already had the alignment of HR and health and safety. Both were coming to the table, egos aside. It was right, okay, how do we do this? I don't know everything. Let's figure it out together. And that was such a wonderful starter for 10, because that gave them the really good grounding. And by the time they came to us, they pretty much got 75, 80% of the game. But because they'd aligned from the beginning.
That's incredibly disarming, a really disarming way of trying to achieve progress, right? Is recognition that it'd be very rare for any part of the business to have all the answers, otherwise it'd already be solving the problem. And so it's recognition that this is a new and emerging area. There isn't a whole treasure trove of what good looks like out there, because it's still doing this well. It's still an emerging aspirational aspect for most businesses, and so it is one of those opportunities and challenges that needs to be genuinely solved in the context of each individual business, right? You can't go sort of buy it off the shelf and implement it. It needs to be done from within.
That's a really nice way of putting it. Yeah, this isn't something you can buy off shelf. This isn't something you can productize, so to speak. This is fundamentally about organizational culture. In fact, well-being, psychosocial risk management have as much in common with culture change and OD than anything else.
That's a pretty important recognition, I think, for people out there, because it is. I think it's an intimidating topic for many people, and so that is what it is. The opportunity, though, is that through things like the ISO 45003 framework, that starts to give a bit of a roadmap, a bit of a game plan in terms of a process or a framework that you can implement within your context, that gives you that pathway to work through to kind of come out the other side with a really contextually kind of fit for purpose solution.
Yeah, and that's the great thing about 45,000. It doesn't purport to give you, this is exactly what you need to do in your organization. It is guidelines which provide you, as you say, that roadmap. How do I translate that within my organization? And that's what we find. In fact, just doing another piece of work with a global logistics company. Again, same thing. They have 45,001. They have a tremendous management system. They've already embedded elements of 45,003. This was about, what are the gaps? And it was that final piece of the puzzle for their teams. But again, another organization where it was working because they had the alignment of HR and health and safety very much from the outset. That was what also helped. For them, when you start picture building, for them, their fundamental elements missing were really around elements such as leadership behaviors and styles, often linking back to things like self-awareness, self-acceptance, emotional intelligence. Those were the sort of plugs that needed to be addressed to really help leverage and drive forward. But only by looking at the data, building the story, understanding and consulting with the teams on the ground, are you then able to truly unlock, how do I translate my roadmap into my organization?
and then ultimately driving that into the way we work, who we, as people collectively, which ultimately then starts to unlock value, in terms of productivity or relationships, retention, insurance, all the things that kind of flow off what I sort of call the above the line value that you kind of unlock through positive well-being.
Yeah.
We often talk about the negative side of it in terms of absenteeism, presenteeism, high churn, that kind of stuff. But to the point made earlier, the other side of it is far more attractive to focus on as an opportunity in terms of the productivity uplift, the talent retention, the resilience built into the business. There's a significant size of the prize there to do it on top of looking after your people.
Absolutely. We're asking about other flaws that organisations can or has holes in the floor that organisations can sometimes fall into, and to some extent it sort of links a little bit back into that sort of tertiary mindset where we've got great support services, and then you start looking at, well, actually, how well are people engaging with the support services, and then you also that also tells you multiple stories as well.
Yep.
In terms of, yes, to some extent, what's that data from the utilisation telling you,
Yep.
but also it's what's the data not telling you or what's the data telling you from the people that aren't engaging. Because, of course, a heavy reliance on tertiary interventions without focusing on the primary or secondary means that you fall into that age-old trap of engagement and utilisation.
Yep.
We hear the age-old argument or conversation about the traditional employee assistance program. Well, we've got 2 or 3% of our workforce use it. Okay, fabulous.
Yeah.
We know 30 to 40, sometimes upwards of 50% of the workforce will be struggling in some shape or form at any given point in time. That doesn't mean 30 to 50% of the workforce would be utilising such services in any given year, because of course people will reach out to different types of support, depending on individual preference, awareness and so forth. But it's of course understanding what are the barriers also to accessing support as well. So great having support, important having support, but recognise what the barriers are, but also recognise what your principal communication vehicles are. Because often it's not the poster or the intranet, it is your peer.
Yeah, the colleague.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, and that's culture, right? That's culture surfacing itself right there. You can put posters up in the lift or on the backs of the office doors or whatever it might be, but ultimately colleagues, talking to having trust with each other to be able to kind of talk about some of the challenges they're experiencing in their role, so that right sort of support can be put in place, and ideally looking at I suppose the trigger points in the first place, like with the type of work being done, the person doing that work, the type of role, the sort of the way you describe it aligned to the standard, those sort of internal and external factors, all that kind of stuff. But ultimately, someone having a conversation with someone is going to be the thing that really moves the dial on this sort of stuff, right?
Definitely, yeah. Imagine if you're my boss, you'd make a brilliant boss, I'm sure. Imagine you're my boss, and I'm struggling at work for whatever reason. Struggling with whether it's work or home related. You as a manager will know or should know a certain number of things about me. You'll notice, when I'm not operating myself, whatever that might be. But having that relationship with your line manager, for that line manager to be able to spot that, to B, have the relevant conversation with you in that relevant forum. Steve, is everything all right? Look, why don't you grab a coffee? Or if you like, after work, God forbid, glass of beer. Whatever that might be, whatever's suitable. But then having that conversation, and then to have that open, authentic conversation where you've got that trusting relationship, where you're able to say at some point during that conversation where it's relevant, Steve, why don't you take some time tomorrow? We'll clear up whatever, essentially giving me the permission to make time to go and have that conversation with the relevant professional. Look, here's the number. Look, give them a call. Or I can give them a call and get them to give you a call back if you want. Because essentially it's about understanding what might be the barriers, because human beings are tremendous at masking. And also recognising what, when, why, and how we might reach out for support. Often one of the biggest barriers to support tends to come back down to, do I really recognize, A, there's an issue with myself,
Yeah.
and B, what might be the potential value of me. Now, obviously, we don't contextualize this necessarily in our heads, but what might be the potential value of me reaching out to that help?
Yeah.
So if that is a barrier,
Hmm.
me having a conversation with you as my manager or
Yeah.
with a trusted peer to say, have you thought about this? I've used them before. I found it really useful because of X. By all means, give them a call.
Yep.
Takes away tremendous amounts of barriers.
What's your? I mean, that's because I totally agree with your remarks there. What's been your, given that 30 years working in this kind of industry and seeing it evolve rapidly and quite significantly over that period, and perhaps in the last 5 or 6 years through the pandemic, we saw a massive lurch to online related work. What's been your observation around the impact on that trusted line manager relationship in that context? Like, have you seen a deterioration in quality of like trusted line management relationship, like post-COVID, when we're a lot more online and a lot less kind of in person, perhaps? Or has that been something you haven't really noticed? Or
Yeah, definitely. It's a really interesting question, and I would say it's brought it much more to the fore. It's put a lot more, not pressure. It's put a lot more opportunity on managers to improve and build on their competencies, and particularly things such as self-awareness, emotional intelligence, and to really help better understand their teams, to be better placed to support them.
Yeah.
And that's probably one of the fundamental shifts. I mean, given what we found, a big shift in the last sort of 4 or 5 years is that connectivity.
Yep.
It's the ability to communicate, have the relationships within working environments, even the organizations which are hybrid mixture of home and work. You see a tremendous change and shift in terms of things such as creativity, innovation. It looks different in organizations today. The line manager role is a really important linchpin to help ensure and maximize that visibility, collaboration piece, but also to build the emotional intelligence skills of managers to be able to spot, identify, not just when things are going wrong, but of course, when people thrive.
Yep.
So I can do more to capitalize on people thriving. We have a lot of accidental managers in workplaces today.
Yes.
People who are brilliant at their jobs, they've been promoted into
Yep.
their roles because of technical competence.
Yep.
We've now got this tremendous need and opportunity to equip their people capabilities.
And we talked a lot about like wellbeing isn't like a product you can go kind of buy off the shelf and just sort of embed it in the business. There's a real process to go through, and at the core of that process is really good quality consultation. Could you give us a bit of a walkthrough of what good looks like in that area, in a way that people out there can think about how they could start to apply this in their organisations, from designing and executing good consultation that drives some good outcomes in terms of their wellbeing strategy?
Yeah, it's a really good area. It's such an important area, isn't it? Because it is about how do we engage everyone in this? Because fundamentally, we're talking about people, when we talk about well-being, we're talking about understanding what our key risks are and also what our enablers are in the business. Why do people love working for this company? The amount of companies I go into, and when you start engaging with the workforce, what you discover is my two fears that I hear, or the two letters that I hear sometimes in organizations, it's the 2 Ps. Why do you work here? It's the people and the pay.
Yep.
And it's missing, and it's sad to hear that, because every organization does great things in whatever capacity they are doing. And when you hear that people are just there because, well, I like working with my mates, or we've got a nice working relationship with the teams, managers are rubbish though, or it's the pay, it's kind of soul destroying. So this concept of, we don't do well-being to people, which has been a lot of the focus historically. When we think about, particularly with tertiary interventions, we just put the stuff out there and hope some of it lands. We go and train people as mental health first aiders without really understanding, actually, are those the right people? Are people going to reach out to them? How well is that going to land? How are we going to communicate? How are we going to support them, etc.? The collaboration piece, which 45,000 is brilliant in terms of guidance around how we do this. The collaboration, the ownership is probably the fundamental starting point, because that's our starter for 10. That's understanding from the teams on the ground, from the workforce, what works, why does it work, what doesn't work so well, why doesn't it work so well, and designing the interventions and approaches in collaboration. So what things from a cultural things, what dials within culture should we be looking to shift? But also what things should we be shifting from a policy perspective? By that I mean, let's take the example of psychosocial risk management framework. So if you think about the line manager's role in stress management in the workplace, how well have we designed their roles that apply to them in collaboration with the managers? Rather than saying, here we go, we're just introducing this new stress management process and policy. That means you've got to do a team-wide stress risk assessment every 12 months because our policy dictates it. Oh, and then, of course, if anyone's ever says they're stressed, we give them this stress risk assessment form. Do we design that in collaboration with the actual managers who can do it? Absence management is another classic example. Here's the process policy. Off you go, do it, apply it. And then, of course, 60-70% of the time it doesn't really work effectively. So you've got the collaboration from, obviously, whatever procedures, solutions you put in place, how well has that been done, but also the collaboration and the consultation in terms of the what and the why. But the focus being not on the negatives, the focus being on what works well, because we want to build on, do more of that. What doesn't work so well? What are the things we're going home at the end of every day and telling our friends, family, and our partners about what we don't like about our jobs? What are the dials we need to shift internally? So the collaboration and consultation is absolutely crucial in setting the framework, because what you're also doing is listening and engaging. An organisation that's just in the middle of working with at the moment, an amazing organisation, and they're in construction. And one of the things that we identify, and they've gone through a big change recently. There has been some changes in headcount. There's been some changes in roles. And the one thing we discovered straight off the bat from engaging with the teams on the ground actually was actual consultation. Nobody actually listens to us on the ground. I love working for this company. Fortunately, this was a company which people were saying it wasn't just about the pay and the people. It was the pay and the people and the product. What we do and the purpose. Yes, absolutely. I love what we do because I see the impact of what we do day in, day out. It's wonderful. Love hearing that. But what they're not doing is they're not listening to the teams on the ground. So leadership is making changes in the business without actually asking, is that going to work? So the collaboration, consultation's absolutely vital in making sure what you do, whether it's specifically related to psychosocial risk management, well-being, or just actual day-to-day business performance. Because remember, our employees are not going home at the end of every day and say, I love working for this company because well-being is fantastic. Well-being to the employee, if you got a group of employees around this studio today from different companies and ask them what well-being means, I bet you any of them, very few of them would actually say what we might assume that they would say. Well, it's mental health, isn't it? Or it's about your health insurance, or it's not. They will say it's things back down to just having a voice, communication in the business, consult. Well, they might not use the word consultation, but whether they're
having a fair go, or
absolutely, that's what really matters to people on the ground, and inherently we know that. But sometimes we tend to get sidetracked with, but we've got to have the policy and procedures. Yes, we need the policy and procedures in place, but don't let the approach be driven purely from a siloed approach to putting policies and procedures in place.
I love that. I love the analogy of really like find out what your people say when they go to a barbecue on the weekend with friends, and someone says, "Oh, you work at Safe 365," how's work going, or whatever it might be. What are the things that in the candor of a social environment with trusted friends, what comes out? Because that's the missing piece, right? Because for a lot of business leaders, I don't think have a very good understanding of that. And obviously they want to find out, but deploying strategies that really start to flush that out, ideally just through having good quality trusted relationships at work, and having that sort of open, honest sort of feedback loop can kind of help fill it out to a fair degree. I think that's a key question in terms of practical takeaways for people out there. Is how well do you think your perception of what that narrative would be for your colleagues that are going home from work each day? How close to that is, do you think, to what you think it is? Or is there a gap there? And how did you find out? Get them together and actually start to talk to them about those sorts of things in those terms. So there's a frame of reference to be able to describe it, obviously in a safe environment. The other thing you mentioned, which I think, again, it doesn't matter whether it's well-being or any other facet of business performance, is that, as the saying goes, you always put the customer at the centre of your universe. And if you're a leader in a business, you've got two customers, the people you sell your products or services to, and you've got your team, because the team are your value engine for your business. And so from a well-being perspective, if you want to maximise business performance, then you've also got to think about putting the customer at the centre of your universe in terms of your employees, so that you're consulting them on the matters that affect them, so that they can feed into that, so that, from hearing you correctly, so that the solutions that you then land on actually can be implemented effectively by those people or for those people.
Absolutely. And we know it's a bit of an age-old, it's a bit of a cliche, isn't it, almost, to say our employees are our number one customer. But it's so true. Yeah. We do tend to forget that. Maybe that's a bit unfair, not that we forget it. I think sometimes we don't give it the credence we need to within a business. Yeah,
it loses focus perhaps, or it becomes a bit the comfortable pair of shoes, the comfortable pair of clothing. It fits, it does, it performs, and you're happy with it. But actually, if you're not kind of concentrating and supporting it and nurturing it, then things can deteriorate, and all of a sudden the pair of shoes is not not performing the way intended, and you don't want that. So
apologies.
No.
I was going to say, another interesting observation we see with organisations is, at what point do they do their touch point? Yeah. And often it might be pulse survey, it might be the annual survey, but at best it tends to be the 6-month piece. Yep. And again, we're in that mindset of the people experience is being driven by one area, whether it's L&D, whether it's HR, whether it's health and safety. We're trying to establish at that point, we're doing our great day at work survey or whatever it might be, provides fantastic insight, but it's a 1-point touch. What are we doing throughout the year to identify? How often we actually are consulting and collaborating? It's great to see there's been such an emergence of ERGs or employee resource groups, which are fantastic. If we deploy ERGs, make sure we've got clear roles, responsibilities, foundation for what they need to work from, guidance, because they will provide another important continuous ongoing voice within an organisation. Fantastic. But the other key one, of course, are your line managers. How well equipped are our managers to identify? One of the biggest frustrations I see, particularly around psychosocial risk management, stress risk management, is stress risk assessments, individual stress risk assessments being done after the fact. Dave's off with stress at the moment. It's okay, he's back next week. We'll do a stress risk assessment with him. If someone trips at work, we don't do a physical risk assessment afterwards. We do the safety investigation or the accident investigation. With stress, we do tend to over-rely on, we'll do it once if someone raises stress and the issue has already manifested itself.
Why is that? Why are we still thinking like that?
I think it's partly because it's what we feel comfortable doing. Because the evolution of that is, okay, me as a manager, how do I identify and mitigate and design out the risks before they become factors? And what things am I doing as a manager to spot those? Also, how reflective am I as a manager on actually what impact does my managerial style have on my team performance stress risks? Because managers can be the greatest stressor for a team, but they can also be the greatest enabler for a team as well. So how well do a manager understand that? In the UK, there's the Health and Safety Executives Line Manager Competency Indicator tool, which it's been around for years, but it's a wonderful tool. It's a lovely self-reflective survey, 30, 40 questions. You just get to rate yourself. You don't share it with anybody, you just rate yourself. Actually, are my behaviours conducive of, do I create stress or do I prevent stress with my behaviours?
Yep. There's a good little takeaway for people out there listening. Go and check that out.
Yeah.
I mean, I think all those little tools for, it really touches the point you made earlier, that so many of us that get have a technical expertise and get promoted into a line manager role and into a leadership role and into an executive role at some point for many, without necessarily along the way having some of the personal or professional development opportunities to build out that sort of breadth of competence, sort of on-the-job training, building the plane while we're flying it, all that kind of stuff. But I think all those little tools that are out there, often, they're freely available, just about the awareness of them are such helpful little resources to go and pick up, plug some information about yourself, learn something about yourself, increase your self-awareness a little bit. We've had a really good episode, a few back in the series, looking at the importance of and the role that self-awareness can play for safety leaders and how powerful that is. And this is another component of that, from a, do I free up people from stress, or do I actually add to the stress as a manager in my style, my behaviours? I think that should be a question that any people manager should be able to answer out there. But I suspect on a critical mass, the awareness is probably quite low. And there's great opportunities out there just to lean into that a little bit more. And I suppose all of us take a bit of responsibility for ourselves in that. There's no shortage of insight to give us that kind of directional compass bearing of where we're at.
Absolutely. I look back on some of my managerial experiences in the past over the last sort of 20, 30 years, and there are times I look back and go, oh my God, did I really do that?
Yeah, that's all right, we've all had those.
But of course, probably like every other manager, felt I was doing at the time what was right without necessarily having that self-awareness to recognise, or the emotional intelligence to recognise the impact.
Yep, and quite often that, sometimes that, I don't say quite often, it's, if you look at who's managing the managers, who's, eventually you get to who's the CEO, who's the board, that kind of leadership culture inside organisations that often permeates, down through an organisation, and there's a lot of sort of catch the ball, pass the ball that goes down through line management structures in the absence of the awareness. And so being able to kind of recognise some of those patterns, and kind of, I suppose, one, understand yourself and how you contribute, but then also trying to share that in a safe way with colleagues, so that you can kind of just start to open up that sort of collective self-awareness. I think it's pretty key.
Absolutely. Infectious sponges.
There we go.
If your leader's not engaged or understanding, then that will impact on the manager's behaviour. Yep. And then you see inconsistencies in approach because, we're all different. Everyone's coming at this with a very different frame of reference, very different context. Yep. There might be someone, let's say a manager who's got someone in their team that's struggling with personal mental health related factors. Yep. And that leadership, maybe it's not a priority to them, or they do not have a full breadth of understanding of it, and then therefore the behaviour to the manager is, but I have lived experience of this, and then therefore the approach I might do to support this individual in my team might then be different to what happens in another manager with another team, because you end up with different inconsistencies in approach. Yep. But if it's being led from the top, yep. and I can totally understand why you do sometimes still have organisations where leadership is not fully aligned, not bought into it. It's often because they just don't understand. Yep. So it is inherent upon our role within the HR health and safety sphere to have an informed picture. Yep. And I would say 9 times out of 10, if we're just starting down this road or we're looking to build out what we've got, fundamentally, our starting point is build your picture effectively and robustly as much as you can do, because that will then enable that picture, the clearer picture to the leadership. Because the moment the leadership can align clear people, challenge, need, drivers with bottom line performance, then it works.
Yep. And what I also liked about the way you sort of package that up quite nicely is that you've sort of got a framework framework up here, but that still creates freedom within the framework at a human level, at a leadership level, that recognises that every work is unique and different and has different motivators, different stresses, has different stuff going on in their personal life at any given point in time, and the role of a line manager of those people is inherently complex. If you've got 5, 6, 7, 10, whatever people that you're trying to manage, there's a whole bunch of stuff around their roles that you can kind of consult with and sort of design into how they work. But also, aside that, you've got a dynamic component, which is what's going on for them on any given day, yourself in terms of your own world, your own level of self-awareness, competence, etc., EQ, and how you put that all together in a performance as a manager on any given day. It's a really dynamic environment. But I think having some of these frameworks that we're now starting to see in terms of ISO 45003 that are starting to come through start to give a bit of a compass bearing for organisations to kind of aim up at, to understand themselves as an organisation, to kind of take a more, I suppose, systemic approach at managing health, safety, and well-being, in a positive and constructive way.
Absolutely, yeah, very well said.
To kind of wrap things up here, we'll have a bit of quick fire just to kind of get some great responses out of people. Some of these, but from what the work you're doing from a British Safety Council perspective and wellbeing consultancy. If you're, what would be your 3 key messages to, say, CEOs out there who are listening to this, who have the fact that they're listening to this pod is indicative that they've got a curiosity to want to understand more and do more, aim higher for their business, for their people, for their communities, etc. What would be your top 3 bits of advice around taking steps forward in this particular area?
I know I have said this already, but I would say probably the most important one is make sure you've got as robust a picture as possible. Look at what you know, look at how effective and how robust what you know actually is. If it's all based on one piece of a puzzle, it's not going to be enough. So look at that. I'd say that's your first bit. And think of it in simple terms. Think of it through the lens of enablers and inhibitors. I think the moment we start talking about stress, psychosocial risk management at a leadership level, we kind of lose them a little bit.
Yep.
It's about what are the things
Plain English
your people love about why they're here?
Yep.
What's the stuff they're going home and telling their friends that over the barbecue on a Sunday afternoon? That's the stuff that really counts.
Yep.
How well do we understand that? And there's tons of ways you can do that. So build your picture.
Yep.
I'd say number 1, picture building. Number 2, I would say consultation. Is do things in collaboration, design this with the teams. The third one, my goodness, I would say there's 300 or 400 things, but I'd probably say consistency in line management. Make sure your line managers are leading and not just micromanaging. Make sure your managers have got the behaviours, the competencies to create and build on teams that thrive. I would say the most common thing we see in organisations where things fall down or are not consistent will be in management style.
Yep.
But management style doesn't just apply to your people managers, it applies to your leaders as well. So if there was a 4th one, if I could throw a 4th
Sneak
one
it in. I'm not watching.
I think it's take egos out of the equation.
Yes.
Self-reflect. Be self-aware.
Yeah, and drive a putting, I suppose, words in your mouth, but drive a self-awareness agenda almost, like make it okay for people to seek that out.
Absolutely, yeah. Psychological safety is one of the most common things. I mean, in fact, you look at the Google Aristotle project, for example, the fundamental number 1 thing the study came out with was the biggest driver of team performance globally, psychological safety.
Yeah.
Because psychological safety drives innovation, creativity, collaboration.
Yeah. Which collectively drives performance, right?
Absolutely.
What that's all nicely packaged up. What about
There's 5 things I put in there.
From I suppose a leadership perspective around you and a bit of insight into how you think about leadership, from your who are probably the key influences that you've had in terms of your career, in terms of the journey you've been on, which is pretty incredible, 30 years of working in this industry as it's evolved and grown, and it was very much a front and center issue for almost every business out there. huge body of work. Who have been the kind of key leaders or influences on your career that you reflect on?
So a couple I'd pick up on. One, I would say, from a personal level, is a manager or a director that I worked for, actually when I was at Mates in Mind. I won't mention names just because it might be embarrassing for him. But he was a memorable leader because he empowered.
Yep.
He did not fully understand everything that I did day in, day out, but he empowered me to do it. And it also gave me the total security and safety to be able to go to him and say, I don't know.
Yep.
I don't have the answer, but together we can brainstorm that answer. So he was probably one of the most impactful leaders I've ever worked for because very much of that style. In terms of influences, I would say Christine Maslach is definitely one that is a big influencer on me. So she's almost the godfather of burnout theory. And it's going to sound super cliche to say it, but Simon Sinek.
Oh yeah, yep.
Because he talks such logical stuff day in, day out.
Yep.
And I can regale a Simon Sinek story pretty much any day of the week.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, a cynic guy myself in terms of some of the sort of takeaways. And last question for you: what would be your, I suppose the wisdom or the advice you'd give to a health and safety professional out there who's looking to embark on this journey? So we've looked at it from the CEO kind of lens and your advice there, but if you're I suppose a safety professional, the CEO's come through and said, what are we doing in wellbeing? Because often that's how it comes through. What would be your advice?
So to a health and safety practitioner or leader in terms of getting started, yes. I think fundamentally I'm going to quote one of my colleagues actually, who makes this wonderful term, and I don't know if it's a copyrighted term with Disney, but assemble your Avengers. Yep. What she means by that is make sure you've got the right people around the table to start the dynamic. Because fundamentally what you then do from that is you're building the picture.
Yep.
So when that CEO comes to that health and safety practitioner and says, what are we doing about well-being?
Yep.
We're going to build our picture.
Yeah, beautiful.
And we're going to take an informed approach.
Awesome. Love it. I've heard that described in a similar way, but around build your bench of people, to send your players into the game to play different roles at different times to support the team outcome. But I love that. But at the end of that, it's around building the picture. And the more layering you've got, the more defined the picture is, then the better. All right. Look, thanks very much. It's been an awesome episode to really dig into this kind of topic.
Pleasure.
Some great experiences, expertise that you've obviously built up over a very long period of time in the industry. So just on behalf of all the listeners out there, thanks very much for coming in and having a really good chat to us. It's been a really enjoyable chat.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Cheers.